Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy and Mike. Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing?
Oh, good morning, Mike. It is another good week.
We are in the throes of summer now. We are getting ready with all the kids at home, changing our patterns a little bit here. So that is our life here in the U.S. I guess for those who listen internationally, not everyone does the same schedule school patterns that we do. So
Yeah.
Any fun summer activities that you've been doing, Tommy?
Honestly, the kids' summer has been so hectic. They've had vacation Bible school. They've had a lot of pool. So I haven't
pool
even
time. It's great.
Yeah, I haven't even activated a contract that we talked about where they got to do that work in the morning because I'm going to be gracious here where if they're busy from like 9 to 2, we've had a full day. So, but
only by then they can kind of like chill and mellow out in the afternoon and stuff like that as well.
Yeah.
My kids are at an interesting age right now. We've got 11 through 15-year-old now. And so we've been just kind of we just did one where we just played out in the evening. We just kind of took it out a little bit easy in the evening. We shot some basketball hoops. We have a little hoop that we have on the street that we play with. We had little scooters and we were scooting around making like tracks and race tracks around the neighborhood. We live on a cul-de-sac, so it's easy for us to we could take sidewalk chalk and I was like, go out in the cul-de-sac and make a little stop, like a track, and I'll time you. And so that took up like 2 hours of just making tracks and zooming around and this is we're favoring our left-hand side too much. We should probably do some more right-hand turns. I'm like, okay, all right, interesting.
Hilarious.
It was very fun, kind of getting outside and playing all together as a family, which is great. All right. Anyways, let's for our main topic today, we're going to do a mailbag question. This is also a recorded episode, so just be aware this has been pre-recorded for this episode. Our mailbag question is Tommy will read it here. It's going to center around small businesses and fabric, and where does that fit, and what are our options here for small businesses, and should we start thinking about using fabric? Does this help us at all? So that's one area we can look at here. This will be our main topic of discussion. But Tommy, do you have any news, any kind of beat from the street things you'd like to talk about?
So there's a few actually non-fabric blog news items I wanted to cover. And then honestly, just been working a ton with the prep data for AI feature now available on desktop.
Yeah.
And
just came out.
Yeah, just came out and I've been diving in head first. So I want to get your take on it. I want to get kind of what your feedback is, that workflow for if my goal is to have a semantic model that can be, again, a data point or the data source for someone to talk to their data with. Is that workflow and the features that they have right now sufficient? Do you like it? What are your thoughts?
Initial blushes, I like the selection options, right? Which tables to emphasize over other tables and columns. And that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of things in our models that we really don't want the AI looking at or helping us with or producing information around, like, the ID columns, right? Those just don't make sense, right? There's no reason to have those.
Yeah.
Some of the measures and things you may take them out, honestly, because when you build a semantic model, I look at the semantic model kind of two ways. There's like core calculations that are calculating the sums, the averages, the base things. Then you have more elaborate calculations where you're doing like filtering and some kind of aggregations on things to be a little bit more complex. Then there's also calculations that are like very visual focused. Like I'm doing formatting. Like when this number is above this threshold, make it a red color or a green color. And I kind of would argue like a lot of the visual formatting measures don't need to be in place or being used with the semantic model or for prep for AI. Those are things I want to skip, right? So I think if we're talking about like things I want the AI to be aware of, it's the simple stuff, right? That's the kind of, those are the simple things I want you to use to aggregate by, right? I don't want you using my really complex aggregated filtered table with a whole bunch of extra things. Like you have to understand that DAX very intently. And I think there's this, and again, Tom, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe I'm going off the rails here a bit, but there's this interesting interplay between what DAX you build and what does the visual do, right? So sometimes you're building
context,
right?
And
but sometimes you build the DAX very specifically for what the visual needs to output what you want.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
It's that kind of stuff that I'm like, I don't really think the AI needs to know about that stuff. I don't think it helps the AI a ton to have these hyper specific calculations just for a single visual.
Yeah, anytime you're using something like keep select, like all selected, or you're doing something that has that kind of context, I don't think those so far have not worked great with Copilot, because it's not going to understand it when someone's asking for a particular metric, right? That it only really works under the context of these fields. So, but that's the nice thing though about I'm really enjoying this prep data feature. I know there's a few more things I would like to add, but again, just the ability to split out the semantic model both almost like a perspective where I have a view for just what people can see in a semantic model, but then just
Yep.
for AI or for Copilot, where you know what, these metrics, while they're essential, I don't want people. They don't need to really be communicating with that, and that doesn't affect people's ability to actually use those metrics or those fields in the report.
I feel like the whole perspectives inside a semantic model are kind of underused, honestly. Like I think you could use a perspective, because perspectives are like a subset of information that's about the whole model, right? It's picking different measures, different columns that you would show inside that perspective. Now, I don't know if this is what it's doing. And again, I'd have to look a little bit more closely at the TIMDL that's produced by the Prep Your Data for AI. Tell me what happens inside there. What is it actually doing when you do a prep data for AI? Is it adding annotations? Is it adding extra things inside the model? What is it doing to help the model get smarter about those the AI?
So there's a few kind of features that are all going in place. One, again, is which column, which fields to actually show for Copilot to be aware of. But then there's also,
hold on.
Oh yeah.
Are you talking about TIMDL? I asked about TIMDL specifically. Like where is it? Like we're prep. So here's my thing. I was trying to narrow you down. I'm trying to say, look, I'm prepping the model using the Power BI desktop. Therefore, it's doing something. It's saving some information somewhere. So what is it actually doing in TIMDL when you use it? That's my question. Not the actual UI screens.
No, I gotcha. I haven't looked too in depth to see if there's actually anything written in TIMDL when you do the prep data. So, because the other thing too is, like, one of the main features on that prep data is that verified answers feature.
Yes.
Which is basically tied to, if someone asks a certain question, it's going to show up with that visual. I've been loving that, but see, that wouldn't necessarily be in the semantic model, I guess. Like, you know what I mean? Like, would that be in the semantic model's definition?
Yeah.
If it's that visual, I don't know if that is supported in TIMDL. I'll have to dive a little more, but I have a feeling that's one of the metadata things that lives in the service. Because I see where you're going with that, where we can do some little bit of automation around that too. But
no, it was not that. I'm just purely curious. Like, anytime we do something inside the model. So again, what I was hanging on my comment there was around perspectives, right?
Yeah.
So the perspectives are something that you can use. The perspectives select a subset of columns. One of my feedback items here would be, in models that are really large, there are models, there are models that have a lot of tables in them. And so you could spend a lot of time combing through the different tables and trying to figure out what's important, what's not important. So one of the things or feedback pieces I would have here is in the simplify schema page on the prep for AI. I think it would be nice to have like a drop down for the perspectives, because one, they're underutilized. I think they should be used more. And then two, if you've already spent time making perspectives inside a semantic model using like a third-party tool, like, why wouldn't you want to reuse them? Why wouldn't you want to copy one of them and just make a couple more adjustments for the AI and say, hey, AI, just use this perspective when we're training tables. And that way I wouldn't have to go back through the UI of the AI every single time. I could just kind of slightly adjust the perspective as I need. And there's other things here like verified answers and AI instructions, which interesting. But again, those are like,
I see where you're going. Yeah, you're focused.
You see what I'm saying?
And it's perspectives are so underutilized what they could be too, because imagine World Mike too, where you can tell Copilot, hey, when people are asking about these types of questions or topics, use this perspective, right? So it's not just so I love that idea, but that's only that first step. The AI instructions, I'm really curious about how this works, because I would love to see the back end kind of information that's actually generated when I'm doing this, because this is cool. And I like the workflow. It's better than the Q&A kind of setup here, but I don't think we have all of the features in desktop needed for this to be hyper effective.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that kind of goes with the from our good friend Datamark, who actually has two really neat articles that kind of expands on this prep data for AI features that are coming out. So we've talked already about the data agents. We've talked about the Copilot standalone. Um, Datamark came out with two great articles just around using natural interaction and actually doing that in semantic modeling. So where he actually has a notebook that actually can push the cinnamon.
Synonyms.
Yeah. That has always been one of the worst words for me to pronounce. And actually pushing those to a data agent. So to me, I think where Copilot's going to be great is we're going to need the features available in data agents. I think for this to be hyper effective.
Yeah, I mean, think about the more they apply to this, it's a double edged sword, right? Because the more you send to the agent, the more information you have to prepare, and the more tokens you're going to use, the more expensive it would become,
Sure.
right? So we're playing a bit of a balancing game here. I feel like at some degree, where the more I enrich the prompts that I'm going to give to the Copilot, the better the answers will be. But on the other hand, it's also going to cost me more money because it's not like a $20 subscription to an AI.
Yeah.
This is every single time I send more tokens into the prompt, it's going to cost me more money because it's going to take more effort for the prompt to do its thing. So not quite sure how that's all going to pan out at the end of the day. But I do think, to your point, Tommy, right? The semantic model is the definition for all the different properties, the various, like everything you need to do is kind of centralizing around the semantic model. And when we look at like other tools like Snowflake, or I guess the other one would be Snowflake. It's the other data warehouse thing. So Snowflake and Databricks, those are other two systems for data warehousing, and both of them just recently announced they're both building semantic models. They're building semantic model definitions to things, right? So they're adopting what Microsoft has already had for like 10, 15 years here with the semantic model, and using this technology to store the metadata. Like just having lakehouse tables doesn't really store the relationships, doesn't really store all the descriptions and other semantic level things on top of. So that's why they have Unity catalog. That's why these other cataloging experiences, these metadata things are being generated on top of the data that's already there, because you need more enrichment for the AI to understand the context of what you're asking for.
And the limitation that we have right now with the semantic model, at least that prep data, is you think about what it's actually doing in the back end. It's trying to generate code to, in a sense, do a query to the model. Well, the problem is it's probably what language is that being generated in. That's where I really like data agents, because you can actually translate a SQL statement or a KQL statement or even a DAX statement and use that all in the same data agent, because I want to query my table in a certain way. Well, DAX is as great as DAX is. I don't know if it's the best language to do quick queries or going to work the best for how Copilot works. Usually things like, I don't know. So that's where we're still at. But there's a lot of features to kind of get the phrasing, the way that we actually word things correct. I'm still looking more for how we actually weight things, but it's going to be interesting, the ability. And I think where I am focused on is how well does a tabular model work for AI? When we look at all the different AI tooling out there in the world right now and what it uses for its back end, how well is that going to translate over to a tabular model definition or a semantic model? So that is currently where my focus is right now.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of experimentation and figuring out what works. I'm looking forward to the community bringing up whatever seems to be good there as well.
Yeah.
Interesting topic. What other topics do you have for us, Tommy?
Honestly, those were the big ones, was just prepping data for AI, and just the two great articles on kind of feeding things to a data agent, and then just kind of going over the prep data ecosystem right now. And Fabric.
So I'll make sure I include the links for these things. There's 2 comments here from DataMark. He's got a couple posts here that the natural language isn't magic, and then automatically populating data agents with the semantic model synonyms. Data agents is quite interesting to me. I'm not quite sure where we're going to go with data agents. I think that's one that has a lot of potential for me. Taking a semantic model, adjusting it, adding some extra stuff around that, prepping your model a bit more for AI, adding additional context. That seems very interesting to me. I do think there's a trend here. The trend is when you use AI against your data models, the AI is being used to generate SQL code. And once you have the output of that, you're then building visuals and tables and talking about the data that's being returned. I think we have very quickly found that the agents are not good with numbers, or AI is not really good with numbers. So asking a specific number-based question from the model really isn't going to get you the answer you want. So I think we're starting to already see a shift in how AI is being used. The AI is really good to write code. So we're going to use the AI to write SQL, and the SQL then will return the answers that we care about from the model. Or that, to me, that seems like what we're going to be doing here a lot more.
1,000%. Awesome, man. So I don't know if you, but I cannot wait to dive into this mailbag today.
All right, let's do the mailbag then. So jumping in today, our main topic here will be Power BI without Fabric, navigating Power BI in small business and things that we can do there. Tommy, go ahead and read us the mailbag here. I think this is a great question to ask.
All righty. So here we go. I enjoy your podcasts, but
so do I.
I'm a fan. It is very medium to large enterprise focus. So some good feedback there. I work a lot with smaller businesses, e.g. credit unions. In listening to episode 412, your justifications are great if you have the infrastructure to support Fabric. For example, I have a SQL server for reporting, usually built for SSRS for business. It may be a cloud or not. They don't want to pay for Fabric. So my only 2 options, disagree here, are sending out the PBIX file or posting to SharePoint. The business doesn't want to invest in Power BI Pro premium licenses for the whole company to view interactive reports, nor Power BI, which has its own set of vulnerabilities. They already spend 6 figures a year already just to get data snapshots out of proprietary systems once a day. Am I missing something? Yes, I'm referencing banking, but it could be any small to medium-sized business that needs reporting. They need to be able to justify how it gains them on something more than what they get now.
Yeah, this is a good question. All right.
Whoa.
A lot of thoughts that kind of come to mind on this one. One, I will also argue the challenge, I think, becomes a little bit more. I think you get a bit slightly steeper of a challenge here because we're also in we're in SSRS land, but we're also in the banking industry. And my understanding of when I've worked with banking and or financials, there's a much harder line between like the data engineering and the SQL DBAs versus like the business and what you can go access inside the business of things. So there's a much stronger delineation between the 2 groups, and users of Power BI in the financial space get a lot less flexibility to build what they want to build on top of SQL servers because there's just a lot more. I mean, it's literally legal legislation that requires you to have tight control, who's accessing what at what time. There's a whole bunch of other extra things here that Fabric somewhat gives you, but doesn't always give you all the pieces of this. So yeah, this is a great question. Tommy, where would you take this one? What do you think what are your initial thoughts or initial reactions?
So first, I do appreciate the users' feedback on. I think a lot of our conversations are if you had the whole shebang, you're using Fabric and you have access to all the features. But I think there's still a lot of people like this person here, where, man, we're just trying to get out the door or just even have a door open to start using Fabric. And to your point, even with a banking sector, they have a ton of systems too. And just the integration itself is a pain where usually a lot of the investment is made. But
Yep.
I want to, for me, I kind of want to focus here on that last sentence that he said, where they need to be able to justify how it gains them something more than what they get now.
Yeah.
And I think this is the big thing for a lot of organizations.
So this is probably where, again, when I listen to this question here, this is probably where I'm trying to attack this problem as well. I would almost argue, like, what is the SQL Server reporting doing? And does it have to be on-prem, and does it have to be in the cloud? So usually when I start seeing organizations starting to shift more towards a Power BI or more towards Fabric, it's when they have an opportunity where they need to adjust how they are storing their data today. Like the SQL servers that are on-prem, they're getting too old, they're getting unsupported, and now there's like a cost initiative of, we're going to now evaluate how many dollars we need to throw at a new SQL machine, a bigger SQL machine. We want to store, like, what are the things you're trying to do on your current SQL things on-prem that you can't do because, like, for example, in financial sector world, you're going to do a lot of snapshots. Is there something there that you want to do in snapshots that you need to do where you can't do the reporting the way you wanted to because the SQL server just isn't large enough? We don't have enough storage space there. So I see it as an opportunity. When we get to that moment where things are too old, we're getting deprecated, we got to update, we got to move things to the cloud, that's when I'm thinking about, okay, let's revisit the cost comparison between what would a Fabric SQL server look like versus a Azure SQL server. And even to that degree, if you already have the SQL server inside Azure, is there a reason why you may want to move into Fabric? The SQL servers, in my opinion, run basically the same way. There may be some slight adjustments there. And then the other kind of key point that I would actually argue here as well is a lot of your data is coming from SQL servers, but that doesn't necessarily mean the SQL server is only the place where you're getting the data from. I would argue
that's a huge point.
There's probably other things you're going to want to go get data from. And if you're spending so much money on getting data out of current proprietary systems, maybe we start looking at, like, maybe we should be landing data in a lakehouse. Maybe we should be using a lakehouse with file folders to actually learn. So again, is there a cost reduction there as well? So usually I'm trying to attach Fabric to, like, look, there's a cost savings, there's a speed to deliver the value of the data, and how can I apply or basically make it a wash, right? What I would have spent in net new development for this new feature or more data or more storage, I could then shift that expense over to Fabric and then adjust what we're doing.
This is the point. That's I very interesting the way you put that, because I almost would argue the opposite here, where I think a lot of the I think that hesitation is a lot of organizations, especially mid-size, they have more systems than they have resources for, and they're probably already doing some work in some, to this point, some archaic systems. So why do I want to add another step to that feature? And okay, now I'm going to add it to a lake house. Okay, now I'm going to add it to something, another system in Fabric, where to me, they're already having this huge investment on the old systems. That means also the upskill too. Most middle-sized organizations, it's hard for them to keep pace with all the technology changes, both from the investment and also the skill, right? So that's the challenge that you find with, if I'm going to, why would I just all of a sudden just jump to Fabric? No one on my team has any of the experience. Yeah, they're all SSRS and old systems, but if I'm going to use Fabric, then that means that team has to entirely become experts in this this new environment. And that's a hard sell. That's a really hard sell.
It's not experts. No, I disagree with you in that statement. You always think everyone has to be an expert before they use everything. That's not the truth. That's not true. That's not true. What you're saying, my whole point here was, I'm talking about shifting costs, not absorbing new costs to do this. What are we doing today that's inefficient? Is the SQL Server old? Are we running it on a VM? Is it a managed instance of machines? There's potentially an opportunity to move things out of your old world into a new place where you're saving yourself money. So what I'm looking for is how can I, one, provide more capability to my organization, but then two, remove some things from my existing system. I'm not going to try and stand up two of the same things.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I would agree with your statement around like, look, I may be introducing the lake house for something, but the only reason that is there is because it's potentially a more efficient way to get data from proprietary systems, save it, but with more volume of data, right? So the reason we had SQL Server is we'd connect to the proprietary system, we would load what data we could, and we wouldn't keep all the data. We'd only keep the bare minimum, or we'd reaggregate, or we would do some very heavy computing things on SQL to make sure that the SQL database stays very efficient and stores only what we care about, slowly changing dimensions, all these things. The cheapness of storing things in the lake changes it for me. I mean, that frankly changes the ability for me to store snapshots of databases every single day, the whole thing, at pennies on the dollar of what it would used to cost me to build a SQL server. So again, that's where, I mean, it takes some experts to kind of show up and be able to point out where the problems are. I'd also have to really echo on what you were talking there too, Tommy. I think the evaluation of what are your users actually using from your ecosystem, like what are they doing? And one of the things that stands out to me here is this comment around the SSRS reports. So in this question, if all we're doing here is a SQL server that's spitting out a bunch of SSRS reports that are getting emailed to people, and that's the end of the report, like that is our reporting, I might actually argue, don't migrate. Don't stay where you are in the current, data loading SQL Server space, because yes, you can get SSRS reports out of Power BI. It's called paginated reports. So we have the same effect, but I find much more value coming from a semantic model and then having the SSRS reports pull from the semantic model, because then row level security works. You still get the SSRS reporting. You can then apply a schedule, right? So people can get a scheduled, emailed something of those reports. Great, we're doing that. But again, if you're going to take all this effort to move from SQL and SSRS reporting, spend 2 months migrating everything to Fabric just to do the same thing again with sending out pages of emails with SSRS reports, I'd argue like that's not enough of a value add unless you're saving money or providing some new capability. So to me, like that's not the reason you want to go to Fabric. That's not a reason to transition there.
And it's funny you say that too, because I cannot tell you how many initial trainings I was going to do on paginated reporting completely shifted to just Power BI report building, because the idea of what they thought it was, like, oh, it's just the updated SSRS. Like, no,
it's not.
What you actually want to do is going to be achieved in Power BI desktop, man. But here's the thing, and you said that everyone doesn't need to be experts, right? But if right now you have an environment where people are building SSRS, well, if they were going to switch to Power BI reporting and even right now, forget the licensing issue here. Well, again, that's a business where their cost for data and for BI is probably limited. That's not a huge investment in terms of or going above and beyond. Well, someone's got to own that. Someone's got to run with that. And if their only experience is building SSRS, how quickly does that translate over? So, but I think the bigger thing here is too, where it's also about how people are viewing these reports right now. And I think that's where I would think value add here is I am trying is dealing with the snapshot issue. It's funny, the book on Jamie Dimon that I was reading, and he was talked about how his number one investment when he got to Chase, the number one thing he focused on was systems integration. And it was about getting all their systems to be able to talk, because they had like 490 different things just so they can actually have a single source. But his reports were not anything on the cloud, but it's still Excel files. And it was still rows and rows and rows of data, where for a lot, and again, this is part of the data culture thing too, but I can wow you with a bar chart. I can wow you with these things, but it's also about this point too, shifting everyone over to what a report can do compared to what we're used to and what we know. Because again, any technology, I'll stop there. So
Yeah, you're seeing a lot of things there. So a couple questions that kind of come up in my mind as you were stating those things. One was, you mentioned Power BI, and I think your comment, or the very first comment you made was, hey, I was going to do a bunch of SSRS reporting, but then I turned them over to kind of doing Power BI. I think it's a great statement that you made. But I also would argue, especially for this question here, right? If you already have a large user base using the SSRS reports today, I'm working with a couple of clients right now. All their customers want is a bunch of SSRS. Period. End of story. Like there's no question about it. Like if we can't support that, there's no use in doing anything fancy, moving anything forward. Period.
Right.
So my question there is like, even if we like, what percentage of your SSRS blah blah blah, I can't say anything. What percentage of your SSRS reports could you actually replace with Power BI reporting? And then once you say 10%, 30%, 40%, I'm not quite sure what that would look like. And so, okay, fine. If we can only replace 30% of our reports with Power BI reports and get rid of, like, physically turn them off, no longer render them, is what I'm trying to communicate here. Is that's what we're saying. Then is that worth the effort to go in and do the Power BI semantic modeling? What other capabilities are you giving yourselves? Do you want to start just deploying and using apps in a way that's going to do this? I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to need to start figuring out what's the right blend of this information. So again, I'm kind of reading between the lines here a little bit in this question. They're doing SSRS and they're dumping PBIX files into SharePoint.
Yeah.
That hurts me. Like, so the one thing I would point out here for small businesses should not be selling around Power BI reports as PBIX files into SharePoint sites. That's the same thing of just doing Excel files and just putting data in an Excel file and then saving the Excel file to SharePoint. I mean, you might as well just do it there, right? There's no reason to do anything fancy in Fabric at that point. Make a semantic model, connect, analyze in Excel, build the tables you need to build, and just save the file to SharePoint. Boom, done. Right? Only the people who have access to the semantic models can refresh, and then game over. Right? So if you're doing that kind of stuff, then I'm not sure you need to go full on Fabric. But if you feel like you can transition your users away from getting emailed reports using SSRS, and they do want this interactive report piece, or you have the ability to make an interactive report that answers the same questions as the paginated reports, then I think we're talking. I think we're then actually ready to start exploring what can you get from Power BI experiences. So that's just one thing. Another comment here around the licensing piece. Mm-hmm. So, aside from the whole everything, users and all this stuff, I would also echo, depending on how big your business is, you're already spending a lot of money on things for Microsoft Fabric. I would double down and say, do my users need a bit more security around their licenses that they have for the software, right? So the reason I'm bringing this up is if you have a Microsoft E5 license, you automatically get PowerBI.com, a pro license, for free. And that opens up a lot of doors here for you. When you're in these very regulated sectors, sometimes you can kill other programs, like you might be using Google or Google Sheets or some other things. If you can get rid of those costs of these other applications and say, look, we're just not going to use them, and instead we're going to centralize all of our costs down to our users to get them an E5 license, boom. Like, we're there. Like, if you did that feature alone, you get better security. You get better security per laptops. You have more control around those users. There's a security story here, and usually businesses are very willing, especially in the financial sector. You can kind of turn that story very quickly to, let's add additional security for these users by bumping them up to an E5. So again, we're talking about shifting costs here as well. So what software can I get rid of where we can give users E5 licenses, and then everyone gets pro licenses, and then we're off to the races. We can do everything we want with Power BI and paginated reports inside PowerBI.com. So that would work there by itself. And you don't even need Fabric for that.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm always lost when people say the licensing issue just strictly Power BI, especially when they're talking about they're in that SSRS or legacy environment. And and my selling point's not the rich interactive reports, but if you've ever built an SSRS report, they are every single one is its own definition and its own, in a sense, query. It's not off a single model. Yeah, it's a
flat white table.
Exactly.
Flat white.
So every time you need to create a new one, maybe it's built off it, it's its own definition. And you can make easily the argument to me, if you want to talk about saving costs, all the investment in time you're currently spending to make updates to any of your existing SSRS reports or build a new one, which each one of those, again, it's a start from scratch query, querying individual tables without any structure or definitions between them. And
yes and no's, Tommy. Like I'm gonna say yes in the fact that if you're going from like a current SQL server where you're doing that, I think you're right. Like you're kind of starting from scratch every single time. But I would argue, like when I go into like the paginated report experience, like if I'm using that, like now I have a little bit more. It's a little bit less friction for me, right? Because the semantic model already exists with tables and relationships and calculations, and I'm able to reuse that. So, me personally, if I'm going straight SSRS reports from a SQL server, you're right. It's laborious. It's kind of a pain. There's not a lot of help there, right? If I'm trying to build parameters in the report, it's kind of difficult to build it straight in SSRS. Like you got to know what you're doing.
Oh yeah.
But I would argue when you have the semantic model backing it, and then you're adding parameters,
that's where I'm going with it.
It's a lot less friction. Yeah. So I agree with you here. Yeah.
No. This is exactly where I'm going with this. To me, the selling point of just that investment in just Power BI is what the semantic model provides. Because if, again, you have 400 SSRS reports, those are all 400 individual queries that if you need to update one definition, you got to go through all of them in terms of a calculation or parameter. With Power BI, just the idea of the semantic model alone, that source of truth is can be reused, to your point, in a paginated report. In other reports, we already have that definition. And that's where I'm always lost on the idea is like, well, we have SSRS. We don't want to pay for the just the pretty reports. Like honestly, the rich reports, the interactive feature, that's just the cherry on top of what Power BI really is. And I think the misconception is they're thinking Power BI is a reporting based tool.
Yeah.
And that is where, for me, that's the trade-off. You want to not have the licensing. You don't want to deal with, not being more in the service. Fine. Well, you're still dealing with, you're way in the heavy code area. You have no, and again, reusable structure or semantic definitions. And with Power BI, it's that easier deployment. So
you
can easily make the case I can save a ton of money just by having 20 SSRS reports going from a single model. And for me, that's where the big thing is here with a lot of organizations. They don't understand, and maybe this is what the guy or the person was missing, where the conception is if we're going to go to Power BI, it's because we want reports that look better than SSRS. And I think that's missing the point, or really missing the what Power BI actually provides.
I don't read the question that way. I don't read the question as we're looking for a better experience. It sounds to me like this. Just the way I read this question is, there's already a SQL Server for reporting, some on-prem, some in cloud. There's usually an SSRS report on top of it. So like that's kind of like the word that they're using.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to move forward with like, how do we share the PBIX files that we're trying to produce? So it sounds like we're starting to like just on the edge of, we're going to begin to use Power BI, but the only way we can do it right now is sharing PBIX files directly to everyone who needs to have access to data. And that's not, I really don't love that whole PBIX sharing of files. The service is really where I think things shine. So to your point there, Tommy, though, around this, I really want to focus on almost taking like a Venn diagram or looking at like, so let's take every person in my organization and let's just kind of look at them and say, okay, of all the users in here, which users need the certain kinds of experiences? And what I mean by that is let's talk about experiences with, I'm a user, and these users, like we have, let's just call it 100 users, right? 50 of them just need view-only access to SSRS reports. Okay, great. We think another, 10 of them would want to create their own SSRS reports. So do we have that experience today for them? How do we handle that request or that requirement? Okay. Now, what percentage of our users now are also needing to create reports, like build a report on top of an existing semantic model? How many users do we think would actually use that feature? And could we go from like a small number, 10 or 12 users, up to like 20 or 30 users? Would that add value? Like, does our audience, does our company understand that capability? And then going even further, okay, how many users do we think would need to create their own data? How many would pull down data from different data sources and then actually need desktop and actually do imports and other things? Like, are we actually giving out SQL Server access to Power BI report builders so they could go get our existing tables and then use that to build their own semantic models? And then the last kind of audience I would look at here is which number of users in our business would want to write their own SQL statements and use that to build their own tables of data, not necessarily SSRS, but do we have users in our company that are actually writing SQL that we can use to go build things? And the reason I ask these questions is because I worked in a company where it was a couple thousand people, but they had over 12,000 access databases. And okay, yes, you can throw up if you want. Fine.
Whoa.
Wolf is right. But the reason I bring this up is because one of the requirements for their company was that everyone who came into the company always had the need or the opportunity to go get a SQL course. Everyone was run through a rigorous, you will learn SQL. We write SQL in this company. This is how we access our data. So they had a culture in their company that required everyone to get to a certain level where they could all write SQL. Everyone in the company. And that's why we had so many access databases, right? We're doing access because the big data warehouse couldn't handle all of the queries for Excel. So we made access in the middle to write the SQL queries, pare down, aggregate the data that we could then connect directly to Excel. And then we could go make reports and build things. Like I understand the pattern. It made a lot of sense. They went from big databases to medium-sized databases into Power BI because they had to or basically Excel, because they had to aggregate data up. Fine, that is the pattern. But walking into that culture, we could have easily turned on Fabric. We could have easily added, lake houses, warehouses, and then just virtualized a bunch of data for people that they could get access to the full big table, and then they could build their own queries and their own analysis. So if that's a cultural thing, if that's what's in your organization already, you can use that with Fabric. And so going back here to this question, right? Credit unions, small businesses, there's a price point for Fabric that would make sense to you. There is, I mean, you can't tell me that your business is so small that you couldn't afford an F2, 160, reservation for a license for Fabric for a year. I mean, my business, if your business can't make an additional $150, $160 a month for like that small level of like, can we try this out? Does it add value? Does it save time somewhere? Then you shouldn't be even touching Power BI at all. Like you should just kind of walk away from the whole thing, because I think, 150, that's 15 users, not even. That's 10 users at like a little bit more, like 16 users at a Power BI Pro level. And you get the full Fabric. So that means you could add free users. You can add Power BI embedding. There's accelerator solutions around that as well. Like there's options to get the price per user down to a certain point. And I would also argue, here's another question you want to ask yourself. All right, making lots of points here. I apologize. This is my last point, I promise. Think about what's the price points of what you need for users to go do in your application, right? We have Power BI Pro users. We have premium per users. So we have $14 and $24 for those two licenses. If you say that Fabric's too expensive, tell me, what is the right price point for a free viewer of those reports? Is there a price point that you would even care about? Like, would it be $1 per user, $3 per user, $4 per user? What's the right threshold of spend on giving those users access to either SSRS or Power BI reports, because then I think you can have a better conversation around building your own embedded stuff or going to looking at the store, go find if there's an off-the-shelf solution that would help you get to that answer a lot faster. Anyways, a lot of considerations. I'm sorry,
lot of
Tommy.
good points there. I do want to go. I want to go back to your first point
Yeah, sure.
because I think this was. I want to flip it on its head a little because your example about the organization where all those access databases was because everyone was coursed and skilled up in SQL to use the access database. So more access databases are being created, etc. To me, I think that's a little, you got to flip that on its head when you look at Power BI, because you talked about the different users you wanted to look at. Who needs to do SQL queries? Who needs to build their own reports? Well, with Power BI, the core experts, so to speak, the ones kind of building the foundation, it's a small number, just like it is probably at an organization right now with SSRS, the hyper skilled people who are building those SSRS reports. Well, the problem is they are the only keepers of that. And if anyone wants to make an edit or do anything else, again, they have to have some skill or experience in that coding or language. But with Power BI, it's different. And
I don't think there's a need there, though.
Let me get to the point with Power BI here, because to me, it's the technology of what Power BI does changes that argument, because now I don't need people to even worry about what skill that they have is if they can connect to a semantic model, right? Do they know how to drag and drop? We already had the definition created. So the amount of people who can actually interact with that goes up exponentially with Power BI compared to, let's say, you're in an environment of access databases or something like that, where it's more kind of, in a sense, core skill. Power BI allows a few people to create the models that can be reused and recreated across the ecosystem without with skill at all. You don't need to know about the tabular model. You can easily connect to the same model that, again, those core small group of people who are doing all the development in general. So I
would agree with you in that regard. So I think the semantic model is key here, right? So right now the question really is aimed towards, look, we're trying to share PBIX files. Well, you actually don't want to share those. That's not the intent. The PBX file is a semantic model and report all bundled into one piece. So what we're really trying to share here, I think, is what we actually want to share is we want to share the not semantic models. We want to share the we don't want to share the reports themselves. We actually want to start sharing the semantic models. The semantic model share is what I think we care about sharing. So to me, I'm looking at this going, the question here, what are we trying to share? Are you trying to share a semantic model, or are you just trying to give out reports to people? So, if you're trying to replace SSRS with just pure Power BI reports, not the semantic model, and want people to build, now the question I think becomes, how much self-service do you want to have to do here, right? Do you let people build their own SSRS reports today on top of servers? If the answer is yes, then
that's so small, I bet.
Well, I can't guarantee you one way or the other on that one. I would have a harder time reading this one. My assumption here, Tommy, is what's probably happening is, you're right. The SSRS reporting thing is being built by a central team. There's a system in place that says any user who has a problem or a question, you submit a question here, it gets into a queue. There's a team of people who pick up the queue, adjust the report, probably make a copy, make a new report, and spit it out, right? That's what they're doing.
That's the workflow.
That's the workflow. So fine, it is what it is, but I'm looking at it going, is that the most efficient way? And what you're introducing here, Tommy, is you're looking at it and saying, look, I'm going to build the relationships, the definitions, the semantic model, and we're going to push that to users. And we're going to say, hey, users, now you can go in and explore and create your own reports, your own tables of data. And this is what I've seen this a lot coming from SSRS organizations going into Power BI. What typically happens is everyone's like, wow, this is amazing. We can make our own reports much easier. And what everyone starts doing is they make a whole bunch of pages and a lot of reports that are all tables, not what a Power BI report is meant to be doing. So people are not even like the data culture is not even in a place where we could start aggregating and providing visuals and trends of data over time. We're still just trying to focus on we need people. We're still expecting data to be emailed to us, and that's just. I think it's the wrong mindset. I think that's, but it's very difficult to change an entire organization. You have to have kind of some strong leadership at the top to help you move away from. We're not just going to focus on emailing reports anymore. We're going to shift towards self-service. That's what you're doing.
And I think that culture really sets in because you think about those environments where users can't touch the SQL tables, right? They have to be, they're probably on a VPN or network, and there's all these things that I can't touch the SQL server. I need this own user thing. So they kind of have to expect things to be just handed out to them because they have no control over that. And to me, once you introduce the Power BI model, well, now they don't need any access to the SQL server itself because everything's stored in Power BI model with his own security and easy access. I don't have to worry about networking. Again, the idea of alleviating this team. And again, most organizations that are small to medium size do not have a robust BI and data team.
Yeah.
So the thing is, if now we can alleviate so much of their effort around modifications and building, because again, in those systems, the only people going to do it are the ones with the access to tables and that skill that in that particular language or whatever tooling they're using. But now, and to your point about also the sharing the PBX file, well, yeah, that you can see your data, but you're missing the point of that one source of truth. And how far a single model definition goes. I don't need everyone building the reports. And honestly, if people start putting tables in Power BI, but they're using it, great. If that's a start, it's a start because now they are at least, in a sense, being able to now interact with data, and they never would have been able to do so before. Everything before was a snapshot or an export, or in the exact way that SSRS report was built. Now I can tell someone, even if it's just for them, hey, you want to see that report and you want to see the customers by whatever sales region. Well, just connect to the model, put those two columns in there, and you can save that. You don't have to build that for other people, but now you can get that quick view. That definition of the relationships and the pre-built metrics goes such a long way to really enabling users. Again, not even talking managed self-service here, just I want to see those three columns and I would like to see a certain way. I can do that. I have that ability and it's still coming from the same source.
Yeah, this your comment there also brings up another point that I'm thinking here too. In SSRS reports, when you're building these custom queries that go directly back to the semantic model and you're over and over again getting the same data, you are basically locking in business logic into the single semantic report that if you don't repeat that logic for the second, SSRS report, right? You've locked in the business logic into one SSRS report, custom aggregations, custom queries, so you're writing custom SQL to build a wide table of data. And unless you're pushing that up to a view that lives on the SQL server, that way when the report runs, the views run, and then you can so again, I don't know the data culture, what's going on here. If we're talking small business, there may be a variety of options that are happening here. There may not be the rigor that we're focusing on. And all we're doing with the semantic model is we're centralizing more of that business logic together into the same thing. So I think it's another really valid point there. What I do want to kind of maybe end on my final thought here is I just want to think about, how do you want to use this new world for yourself, right? I think the price point of Fabric going all the way down to 150 to maybe $260 per month if you're not on the reservation plans. I mean, I feel like that's a very reasonable price to get started with some of this. And if nothing else, it's a reasonable price to at least get the understanding of, is there something we can do more efficiently with this new world? And I'm also thinking about your user audience. Are there requests that you're trying to handle today that your SSRS reporting does not handle right now? My inclination is saying your users are asking for things that you can't do That's why you're going with Power BI to begin with. That's why you're starting to share things around with Power BI starting. So I think the answer here is, are you able to make the business justification that says, by doing the Power BI things or even using Fabric at these lower end SKUs, are we solving enough of these hard problems? Are we able to take a solution that would have taken us months to develop, and can we build it in now days or weeks? I've talked to Alex Powers about this as well with Power Query. He said he's seen organizations that have had some very complex data engineering and logic go from potentially weeks of development time down to a couple days. And so you can turn things around faster, and you can get data into the lake house, into the Fabric world in a very quick turnaround time. And I think there's also something to say for being nimble like that. Is there a need in your organization to be fast, nimble, and quick to develop those? And that's what Fabric is doing. Fabric is giving you this capability of being more data savvy, I think. I think you also can move your data company to more of a culture of self-service. And what I mean by self-service is building their own reports, making their own visuals, teaching them that capability. And if you do that, if that's the direction the company is going to go, I think the price will easily be able to sit and find the right price point for your users. Anyways, that's what I would argue there. I kind of disagree with the statement. Yes, maybe we talk a lot about enterprise organizations or bigger organizations using Fabric, but I work with a lot of small and medium-sized businesses that just use Fabric in its form, and they just pay for cheaper SKUs, and they're not a huge mega business, but they still find a lot of value. I mean, my business is a small business by far. I use Power BI, and I even pay for my own Fabric F2 SKU to run my reports on, because I find it valuable enough to centralize and make it flexible for people to do their own reporting. Yeah. So even already, like as a small business that doesn't even do a lot of reporting internally, I find it valuable for me. So I think there's the right price point. I think you have to really evaluate where is the value coming for your business, and then justifying that value through the price point for you.
No, final thoughts, Tommy. I think you want to know when it's what you're missing here is if you have 15 or more SSRS reports, you're already spending more time on that than it would take to do what you can do in Power BI. Because I think that the biggest takeaway for me is what you just talked about is what a lot of people don't understand is these legacy things to try to keep upkeep on similar definitions, hidden cost, baby. So
yeah, that's right.
Where you want to alleviate time and the cost of every time pulling your data, and I have to now update 15 tables every single time because one change. Well, I have one model, one source of truth. There's where, to me, everything changes in the conversation. But interesting to see as we keep going farther into the Fabric world, we still have companies like this. We're still very bent on their SSRS, and I can't wait to see more of the bridge. But loved the conversation today.
Yeah, I'm gonna encourage you here. It's just, keep up the good fight. Keep thinking about what you want to be doing, and with that, we're going to wrap. Thank you all very much for listening. We appreciate your hours of time listening to our podcast here today. If you found this one, please share it with somebody else. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. And please share with a friend since we do this for free. Do you have a question, idea, or topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to powerbi.tips/podcast, leave your name and a great question. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all of Power BI Tips social media channels.
Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.